Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, whenever you're watching this. We're going to be looking at infancy as the first developmental stage for human growth and development. So let's start off with Erikson, who, just to remind you, is going to provide the framework for this class in terms of looking at each of the 8 stages. So this stage, of course, is infancy, birth to 18 months. The crisis is trust versus mistrust. The main question is my environment trustworthy or not? The answer to this question lies in the quality of certainty in familial relationships. That baby has to feel confident that mom or dad is going to come when they express unhappiness about something. So when the baby cries for food or cries for it's wet or it's got stomach problems, the mom or dad needs to show up for that child to develop a trust in its environment. A positive outcome is trusting people and their environment. And the strength learned is hope, which is the enduring belief that one can attain one's deep and essential wishes. Basically you believe that the world is a good place and that good things can happen. And then the primary influence is the mother or the primary caregiver. And still in this country and in many other countries around the world, the mother is still the primary caregiver. Let's look at the psychosocial influences. If an infant loses their sense of hope, they will, as adults, struggle with overcoming hard times and failures in their lives, and may never fully recover. That's how important the first 18 months of the child's life is. It sets the stage for the rest of their life, and if they don't have this sense of hope, they will struggle no matter how long they live. Infants who live in an environment that is not dependable express their frustrations through rage and anxiety. And that's really what this is about, is if you can't trust your environment, and the basic job requirement for a mom or dad is to ensure that their child is safe and well cared for. And if the parent cannot do that, that child is going to grow up living with anxiety, and then when it gets too much, they explode into rage. Now, babies have a job. They have a few things that they have to do in their first 18 months of life. First, their senses begin to mature. So when a baby is born, they can see shadow and light, but they're not actually able to focus in on anything. And that usually begins to develop within the first 6 weeks of their life. Also, other senses, they start to explore the world, putting things in their mouth, tasting them, holding things. You'll notice babies will sometimes in their sleep hold on to your finger. And that's, again, their sense of connection to you. Their perceptions, how they see the world. And I'm not talking about, having, a philosophical discussion about the meaning of life. I'm talking about realizing this person who's holding me is really important. And you begin to notice, babies begin to identify people initially by scent, what they smell like. So, in this context, they're beginning to perceive not through necessarily their cognition, their ability to really think, but through their senses. And then they're also developing their motor functions. The baby starts off pretty much not really able to do much. Then we get them into tummy time and they develop their neck muscles and their back muscles. They begin to crawl, they begin to creep, they begin to stand up on their own, and eventually by the time they're 12 or 14 months, they are walking. And then they never stop. The second thing that babies do is they develop a very basic understanding of cause and effect. They cry, mom picks them up. They have a bellyache, they cry, mom picks them up. So again, this is this whole sense of developing trust and faith in their environment. And then last but not least, we're going to be looking at social attachment, and we're going to be looking at that in much more detail, because that's really the main job psychosocially of what babies are going to be doing in those first 18 months. So, infant attachment. Infants who develop a secure attachment to their mothers and or fathers have the willingness and confidence to seek out future relationships. Attachment allows babies to explore their environment, but if uncertainty or stress appears, they can retreat to their mother or father for comfort. So, what they're doing is they start off, wrapped literally like a burrito when you bring them home from the hospital. And then as the months go by, they begin to explore their environment. They may explore their crib. They may explore the floor, wherever the toys are. And if anything happens, they know mom and dad will be there for them to protect them. Now, attachment style is itemized into 5 different categories. So we're going to start off with the secure attachment. This is the best case scenario. The parenting is aligned with the child. It's in tune with the child's emotions. The parents are providing all of the basic needs that the child needs. As an adult, that baby grows up to be able to create meaningful relationships. They're empathetic, and they're able to set appropriate boundaries. The next style is avoidant, and this is when the parenting style is unavailable or rejecting. There are some situations where parents leave their babies alone for the day because they don't have a babysitter, or they are not good parents and they're going to go out and get drugs or get drunk or whatever. So these parents who are unavailable or reject the child, that child will grow up to avoid closeness or emotional connection. They're going to be distant, critical, intolerant, and rigid. Then you get to ambivalent, and that basically is inconsistent parenting. And what you see then is a child that doesn't get that faith. Sometimes their needs are taken care of, sometimes they're not. So the child will grow up to be anxious and insecure. They'll be controlling and blame people for things, but they themselves are very erratic and unpredictable, but they can also be very charming. This is, again, the scenario where the mom and dad are not consistent in their behavior. Then we have the attachment style called disorganized. This is when the child is ignored or the child's needs are ignored. Parental behavior can be frightening or traumatizing. If daddy is beating up mommy in front of the baby and the baby is seeing mom scream and freaking out and dad is screaming, this is a very disorganized environment. So the child will grow up to be very chaotic, insensitive, explosive, often abusive and untrusting, even though they crave security. This is the kind of person who can grow up to beat their spouse. At the same time that they're going to beat this person into submission, they also want them to stay with them. Last, we have reactive. And this is a parental style where they're extremely unattached or malfunctioning. This is when mothers often have postpartum depression and they neglect the child. And as a result, the child will grow up often to not being able to establish good, positive relationships. And oftentimes, this attachment issue becomes an attachment problem. And so they oftentimes go through a variety of different scenarios, not sure why they can't maintain a relationship. So let's look at some of the relationships and how they relate to the child. So the initial relationship is with mom, dad, and if the child has siblings, and they are the foundation of the child's social development. During infancy, a child learns how to relate to others in a variety of ways. We have the physical aspect of playing and walking. And again, playing with a baby, you're not sitting down and playing a video game. You're playing with blocks, you're doing very rudimentary kind of activities, And oftentimes the child will get more entertainment value out of knocking over a pile of blocks than actually putting them together. Language aspect, and this is one of the most important things you can do with a baby, is talk to them, sharing your thoughts and ideas. And what this does is it allows the child to get used to not only the sound of your voice, but it also stimulates the brain to reach out and try and understand. Reading to your child, and again, no one thinks that a 4-month-old can really comprehend what's going on, but again, it's that sound of your voice, the connection of the words, and eventually that child is going to catch on that certain words have certain meanings. The more you talk to your child, the better their language skills will be. Cognitive aspect, learning how to understand. That basic element of cause and effect is one of those ideas where that child will figure out, okay, if I cry, mom comes and gets me. The emotional aspect, teaching the child commitment to others, knowing that mom or dad is always going to be there for them. And then last, the social aspect, socialization and individuation. The more people that baby is around, the more social it will be. And, we're talking about people that this child can trust. You don't want to have your kid hanging out with a bunch of strangers. One of the big issues at this age is something called reciprocal interactions. Around the 4th week of their life, they seek stimulation. They begin to instantly interpret and react to how they are being treated. The parent and child both evolve and their behaviors change as the relationship develops. So consequently, what again you're seeing is that the baby kind of trains the parent, and the parent is working with the needs of the child. You're growing together, and as I had mentioned in class, babies have a temperament, a personality from the time they're very little, and oftentimes parents have to adapt to the baby because the baby doesn't get to that point where they understand they have to adapt yet. Now, when we get to the emergence of relationship building, and here's one of the examples I was talking about, is how a baby will sleep with his hand wrapped around a person's finger, which is one of my favorite things. The characteristics of relationship building. First, we have synchrony. The parents adjust their behavior to that of the infant. Because, trust me, nobody wants to get up every 2 hours to feed a baby. But that's what the baby needs. So the child, their needs are going to force the parent into adjusting their behavior. Then we move on to symmetry. The infant's style of responding to stimuli or interaction determines their temperament. So, again, some of these babies can be very easy. They're laughing. They're just thrilled to be there. Other babies are a little bit more challenging. They don't feel well. They're not calm, and again, there's so much research being done on this, but they really haven't figured out where the temperament truly comes from. Then they move into entrainment, and this is the rhythm that is established between a parent and an infant's behavior. So this rhythm allows the child and the parent to interact with each other in a really positive way. Some babies like a lot of quiet. Other babies like a lot of stimuli, and as a consequence, the parent and the child begin to figure out the rhythm. Last, and this begins around 6 months old, the infant develops what's known as autonomy, and that is when they realize that they have a share in controlling their interactions with others. When the baby smiles, they see mom smile, so they begin to see that they have the ability to control their environment a little bit. And that is a huge step in building relationships with their family members. So let's talk about some more attachment, and I talked about this a little bit already. Childhood attachment, when the child is secure. The normal behavior is distress when mom leaves. Absolutely. A 1-year-old, when mom leaves, should be upset. But when mom comes back, they should be thrilled. Now, what this is going to do when the child is an adult is they're going to be very comfortable in their relationships, and they're going to be able to seek support from their partner or spouse. Then we have the avoidant. And again, this is when a mom leaves and the child is not really upset, and even worse is it doesn't seek its mother when she returns. It focuses more on its environment than on the actual people around. When this child grows up, we call them a dismissing adult. They have a great sense of autonomy, they're extremely independent, but they tend to cut themselves off emotionally from their partners. They really don't want to share who they are with people because they're afraid that they're going to be rejected. Last but not least, we have the ambivalent or resistant attachment. When the parent leaves, the child is very upset at the departure, but doesn't really explore. It just sits and waits. It's very concerned because they don't have that consistency. Mom is inconsistent. Dad is inconsistent. This ends up, when the child grows up, into a preoccupied adult. They fear rejection from their partner, although they have a desire to maintain closeness. So they're very unsure of themselves. They have very low self-esteem. Now, this is one of the really important slides, and I hope all of you spend a lot of time studying this slide. Childhood chronology of attachment development. So around 4 months old, the baby begins to visually track their parent. So when the parent puts the child down in their booster seat or in their high chair, the child will watch their parent. The behavior manifests as smiling, vocalizing more with the parent than with anyone else, and showing great distress at separation. At 9 months old, separation anxiety begins, and stranger anxiety escalates. So when mom leaves at 9 months, that baby freaks out. And especially if mom leaves the baby in the arms of someone who they don't know. I mean, it might be somebody that the mom is very familiar with, a friend, a family member, but the baby knows it's not mom. And the behavior is manifested with clinging to the parent when strangers are around and cries when the parents leave. Again, this is normal behavior. Age 2 or 3 years old, the attachment is very intense. Mom and dad are the world to that child. And they begin to notice when mom and dad are getting ready to go out. And first, this does indicate a better understanding of the surrounding world, so they're paying attention. They know when mom gets her bag or dad picks up his keys that they're going to go. And obviously at this point, the 2 or 3 year old is going to be freaking out in a huge way as mom and dad are heading out the door. Age 3 and 4, their confidence, the child's confidence is growing. They feel secure in a strange place as long as family members or people they're familiar with are there. And at this point, they understand mom and dad are going to come back. They are going to return. So they accept mom and dad's temporary absence, and they're more willing to play with other children. So, at 4, that's usually when a lot of parents will enroll their children in dance class, or they'll take them to preschool, because now the child is ready to begin their adventure in their whole new world. Ages 4 to 10, the attachment is very much less intense, but it is still very strong. And anything unexpected causes the child to turn to their parent. And they still want to hold mom and dad's hand, especially when they're crossing the street. So from 4 to 10, that child is still very much aware that they are beholden to mom and dad, but they want to explore on their own. But if they get stressed, they go right back to mom and dad. Then we have adolescence. And this is where mom and dad become completely unimportant. We call this the weakening attachment. And peers, their friends, become the primary attachment in their lives. And, and that's a very normal part because it's part of growing up. If that baby grows up to be a highly attached adolescent, a 17-year-old who never wants to go out and only wants to spend time with mom and dad, that child is never want to leave home. You're going to have a 40-year-old living in your basement. So, this is a normal part of development. And even though it can be painful and hurt as a parent, it's normal, and you have to learn how to manage that. And when the kids are in their 20s and they start having babies, they'll be right back to mom and dad asking for help. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some theory of development that is specifically related to this age era. We're going to look at Lev Vygotsky. Lev Vygotsky developed something called the dual paths of cognitive development. And whenever I say cognitive, I want you to think how we think. That's what cognition is. So the first one is elementary processes, our biological processes, our speech, our thought, and our ability to learn. So that's one way of learning. The second part is our social and cultural processes. And this is how children learn certain elements through social interaction with others, and then eventually using inner speech or thinking to guide one's behavior. So, for example, at 3, if you want your brother's cookie, you might punch him and grab his cookie and run, because you don't have that inner voice yet that's going to tell you you shouldn't be hitting your brother for a cookie. On the other hand, when you're 4 or 5, you will have been taught that you do not hit your brother to get a cookie. And that inner speech, those thoughts say, nope, mom said if I hit my brother to get a cookie, I'm in trouble, so I'm not going to do it. Vygotsky's theory says that conscious thought is the end product of socialization. So, for example, in the learning of language, our first conversations with peers or adults are for the purpose of communicating. But once mastered, they become internalized and allow for inner speech. It's those debates we have in our head. Do I go to work or do I call out sick and go to the shore? And, you can go back to Freud with that angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, and that's essentially the same concept, is we learn how to make decisions because we have learned how to communicate with others. And by communicating with others, we learn what is right and what is wrong. Vygotsky also had something called the zone of proximal development. And this is the potential for cognitive development being based on this idea. This is the distance between a child's actual developmental level and the higher level of potential development under adult guidance or with more advanced peers. Let me give you an example. So let's say that you're the youngest of 3 children. Your older brother is 3 years older than you. Your older sister is 5 years older than you. When they're teenagers and they start interacting with their peers, their experiences are going to be much different than your experience still in elementary school. But because they bring you along to a lot of the events and things that they go to, you have a higher social rating because you are hanging out with the older kids. Now, what are they teaching you? This is when the 14-year-old teaches you how to smoke a cigarette, or the 15-year-old might teach you to have a beer for the first time. Those are negative examples, but you can also look at it from a more positive perspective. That 15-year-old is also the one who teaches you about history, or your 14-year-old brother is the one who gets you into video games that teach you how to strategize. So they're essentially pulling you to that next level. Full development of the zone of proximal development depends upon extensive social interaction with others. You have to interact with people who are above your range of skill. And your skills can be further developed with adult guidance or peer collaboration than if you're just doing it by yourself. So if you look at this picture over here, the little green area is what you can do by yourself. The blue area is what you can't do yet. And then this purple area is what you can do with help. So, for example, if you are going to make your father a Father's Day card, and you have your crayons and you have your markers, but you can't spell daddy yet, Mom or an older sibling might write the letters out for you to practice, and then you can write daddy in the card. So it's a matter of pulling you to that next developmental level. The connecting mechanism to achieve a child's zone of proximal development is called scaffolding. And if you think of construction, how a scaffold is built, so that, for example, if they're painting a building or they're putting in windows, that scaffold starts off on the first floor, and then it moves to the second floor, and then it gets built up to the third floor, to the fourth floor, and so on. And that's essentially what that is happening with the child, is they're being pulled up their levels by their adults or their older peers. And so when someone helps a child move from initial difficulties with a topic to a point where with help they perform the task independently, that scaffolding is extremely important because it's segmented into stages. You can't take a child who's 5 years old and expect them to do high-level physics overnight. You have to take them step by step by step. It's just like how we learn math. We learn how to add and subtract, and then we learn multiplying and dividing, and then we learn about fractions and decimals, and then by the time we're in high school, we're doing calculus or trigonometry or geometry. So again, step by step, but it's the peers or the adults who are helping that child move forward in their life. All right, that's going to finish today's PowerPoint. If you have any questions, please feel free to text or email me. This particular PowerPoint will be on the quiz next week. Thank you very much.